As you know, every month we have a featured speaker. And this month we have Regina Mason. She has spent 15 years researching the life and times of her great grandfather, the pioneering fugitive slave autobiographer William Grimes. Along with literary critic and expert William L. Andrews, Ms. Mason is co-editor of the authoritative 2008 Oxford University Press edition of The Life of William Grimes, the Runaway Slave. Her essays have appeared in The Race Card Project, various blogs, and The Root. She has presented many educational, corporate, and professional organizations, too many to mention here, and she executive produced the 2017 documentary film Gina's Journey, The Search for William Grimes. We are so pleased that she agreed to share her and her ancestors' story with us today. And I turn it over to you, Regina Mason.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Well, good morning, Sunday Assembly San Diego. I'm going to share with you a talk that I gave in January in honor of the Dr. Martin Luther King holiday. And this was put on through the Berkeley MLK celebration in Berkeley, California. I think it's appropriate for the times. And it's a sort of harsh message because the reality of the struggle for African Americans in this country has been very, very painful. So, with that in mind, um, I hope that you'll feel my energy and understand, hopefully, the message that I'm trying to deliver here. Now, the theme for the MLK celebration was Black Lives Matter. And I think it's fitting for the times as we as Americans grapple with the racial reckoning that is taking place as we speak in this era. So the title of this piece is In the Fight for Racial Equality, Our Stories Matter Too. I Can't Breathe has become a metaphor for the over-policing of Black people in America. To understand how we got here, my ancestor, William Grimes, gives us first-hand insight. At a time when African American autobiography was rare, William Grimes rejected the system that denied Black literacy by writing and publishing his life story. If you could advance the slide, Laura, please. Without permission or support from white people, his book, Life of William Grimes, the Runaway Slave, is a work of literary independence. Published in New York in 1825, it is the first fugitive slave narrative in American history. As we know, the United States is a rich, multi-ethnic society with a very storied past. But the American narrative has really never been fully honest or inclusive in the storytelling. Marginalized people in this country have had to fight hard against structural racism for their truth to be heard. Well, such is the case of my ancestor, William Grimes. His book, barely touched by scholars, was buried deep for 168 years before it reached across time to me. For 5 generations, fragments of the story, the family story, was kept alive until I was able to piece it together into my genealogy and make it yet again appear to the public. So it became my mission in 2008 to bring his story to a new generation. You can go ahead and advance the slide. So in 2008, after years of research, I co-edited a new edition of the Grimes narrative with Professor Bill Andrews. So what you see on the screen now is the Bible, one page out of a very old Bible that's in my family. And if you go down the page from the quarter up from the bottom, you see the name William Grimes and the death date of August 21st, 1865. This document revealed to me what I had been trying to piece together all along. It solidified that William Grimes was the author of the 1825 narrative. I wasn't able to piece that together until this family Bible surfaced. So it was just a treasure, but I want people to know that I would have still pieced this all together 4 years later after I started doing research in old newspapers. But this Bible piece would forever link me to William Grimes, the autobiographer. Let's go to the next slide as well. So in 2008, after years of research, I co-edited a new edition of the Grimes narrative with Professor William L. Andrews, who is an expert on African American autobiography. William Grimes was born in King George County, Virginia in 1784 on the heels of the American Revolution. His father was Benjamin Grimes, a wealthy white planter who inherited Eagle's Nest. So we can actually advance the slides, and people forgive me, I'm not Zoom literate. So where I understand that it's quite easy to navigate through this, I think I'll pick it up one day, but I want to thank Laura for doing this for me. So Benjamin Grimes was a wealthy planter, as I mentioned. He was also the father of William Grimes, the runaway slave. And Benjamin inherited this estate, Eagle's Nest. And William Grimes's mother, I don't have her name. I still hope that I will uncover it in this digital age that we live in. But she was an enslaved Black woman who lived on a neighboring plantation and owned by Dr. Stewart. In the slave states, the children inherited the condition of the mother. And so although William Grimes's father was the wealthy Benjamin Grimes, he inherited the status of his mother. All right. And his mother was owned by Dr. Stewart. At the age of 10, William Grimes was sold to a far off plantation where he knew no one. He grew up to be a very rebellious slave. He endured 10 owners, 4 from Virginia and 6 from Savannah, Georgia. In 1815, he escaped from slavery as he hid among bales of cotton on a brig that would carry him from Savannah, Georgia to New York. From there, he made his way to New Haven, Connecticut, where he began a new life. But he began it as a fugitive on the run. He lived for 9 years in this quasi-free state of Connecticut, because while he was there, slavery was still going on. It was part of that gradual emancipation process. So he lived in constant fear of apprehension, always looking over his shoulder. I mean, it just weighed heavy on his psyche. And I imagine that's the same pressure and fear that the undocumented live in today. When William Grimes felt someone was on his trail, he would pack up altogether and move to some other New England town. That's what fear did to him. 9 years later, after having lived in the free state of Connecticut, his worst nightmare happens. His master finds him. By this time, he's married, he's a father, he has children, and he owns property, and he's a barber by profession. He had no choice but to give up the deed to his home in order to pay for a freedom that was never fully recognized. So, shortly after the ordeal, he begins to write his story. And it's a story that reads like no ordinary autobiography. Instead, to recount his life is to put the hypocrisy of American liberty and democracy on blast. Bill Andrews, my co-editor, says that his book reads like a list of grievances against the United States. And it was through Bill that I learned just how precedent setting the Grimes narrative is. William Grimes was the first person to go through slavery in the South and write about it. I want you to feel the power of that. So, for the first time in American history, you hear the voice of William Grimes, an enslaved man, telling you what slavery was like and what it had done to him. So he's not merely writing for himself, his narrative also gives voice to those who were never allowed to speak their truth. And William Grimes's book is significant for a lot of reasons, but in today's climate, it amplifies a deeply entrenched culture of the over policing of Black bodies in America. And it also talks about the rise of the prisons system that was designed to keep Black people in place. His is the earliest account of this kind of system that would eventually grow into the police or the jail system, prison systems that we know today. He writes lucidly about the brutality, power, and control that overseers and slave drivers had on plantations that he lived on in the South. He also gives us insight to what it was like to live in an urban setting while enslaved in Savannah, Georgia, where they did not necessarily have the plantations to look over and after enslaved people. They had instead the Savannah Watch in the city of Savannah. And that was a group of white male citizens who were appointed to patrol the city streets in order to oversee the movements of Black people, free and enslaved. His account of the jail system, as I mentioned to you earlier, is one of the earliest knowns. He talks firsthand about the horrific and barbaric conditions, and he wrote about it. In Free New England, William Grimes describes his encounters with just ordinary white citizens who were empowered to deputize any Black persons with questions about why are you here? Where are you going? And just about their whereabouts or their actions. So even in the North, it was very hard for Black people to carve out an existence, a life, even in free society. So today, we sort of see this same deputization played out. We have cell phones that capture ordinary citizens inquiring about the whereabouts of other Black people as if they're not supposed to be in certain spaces. So he kind of his narrative sort of is a mirror to the past and even the present. And it illustrates for us how far we've come and yet how far we still have to go. Now, in terms of economic empowerment, William Grimes understood that home ownership would put him on solid financial footing akin to white people. So when his home was forced out of his hands and his family faced living in the streets, we could only imagine the impossible hurdle or mountain struggle that it would take for him to overcome that. And yet he really never did overcome it. He would never acquire the same amount of property, the money to that he had when he lived in Litchfield, Connecticut. But my research tells another outcome for the heirs of Eagle's Nest. And remember, you saw the estate earlier. That plantation still stands today. And that was the home of William Grimes's white father, Benjamin Grimes. Well, that plantation, which still stands, remained in the family for 300 years before it was sold to an outsider in 1974, the year I began high school at Berkeley High. His book ends with a very telling message that I'd like to read to you. I'm sorry. He says, I hope some will buy my books from charity, but I am no beggar. I am now entirely destitute of property. Where and how I shall live, I don't know. Where and how I shall die, I don't know. But I hope I may be prepared. If it were not for the stripes on my back, which were made while I was a slave, I would, in my will, leave my skin as a legacy to the government, desiring that it might be taken off and made into parchment, and then bind the Constitution of glorious, happy, and free America. Let the skin of an American slave bind the charter of American liberty. William Grimes. Dr. Martin Luther King once said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Well, Black lives matter, and our stories matter too. Thank you.